Tonight, let us do something wonderfully inconvenient. Let us drift into a century that adored softness in theory and practiced endurance in private. A century of polished silver, cooled fireplaces, pressed flowers in albums, ribbons in drawers, and mornings that began with cold water and other people's expectations. At first glance, it can seem like a world made of lace, tea, and decorative patience. But if you step closer, and if you move slowly enough for the details to gather around you, you begin to see the hidden labor in every graceful surface. The brushed hair that took half an hour, the dress that required assistance, the visit that looked leisurely and felt like diplomacy, the tea table that offered cake and criticism in the same delicate arrangement. And that is where tonight's story begins. This is not a tale of famous queens, dramatic scandals, or some thunderous event that shook an empire. It is something quieter, and because it is quieter, it is also closer to real life. Tonight, we are following an ordinary Victorian day as lived by a respectable woman, moving through the long choreography of appearances. Duties, comforts, restrictions, errands, conversations, and tiny private acts of survival. We will begin in the cold dimness before morning has properly declared itself. We will move through dressing, breakfast, visiting, sewing, reading, household management, letters, music, tea, evening company, and the slow unfastening of the self at night. The whole day will look orderly from the outside. Inside it, as so often happens in history, there will be effort everywhere. And perhaps that is why this particular subject belongs so naturally to bedtime. Because the daily life of Victorian women was full of repetition, texture, hidden strain, gentle ritual, and those small returning pockets of safety that people create when the world asks too much of them. A warm cup, a window seat, the hush after callers leave, the sound of a brush moving through hair, the last minutes alone beside a candle. If you have ever felt that the day can be strangely exhausting even when nothing dramatic has happened, then you already understand the emotional logic of this story. So let the present room grow softer around you. Let your own blanket feel pleasantly modern. Let your jaw unclench, your shoulders drop, and your thoughts begin to loosen their grip. There's no need to hurry, because this is a slow story, and it intends to remain a slow story all the way through. In a moment, you will wake beneath heavy curtains in a house that breathes with coal smoke and morning chill, where the first sound of the day is not a phone alarm, but the faint machinery of a household assembling itself in the dark. Somewhere beyond the quiet, a bell pull hangs by the bed like the first thread of morning. You wake before you are ready, and not because an alarm has rung. There is no practical little clock glowing beside the bed. There is only the sensation of a room that has cooled too much in the night, and the dim awareness that the world beyond the curtains has started without asking your permission. The mattress beneath you is deep and uneven, layered with stuffing that was once thought luxurious and is now merely determined. Blankets rest over you with a seriousness that suggests protection, but also mild captivity. The canopy above seems to hold the darkness in place. For one small moment, before duty has found your name, you are nowhere at all, tucked inside velvet shade and leftover dreams. Then the house begins to speak, a faint clatter below stairs, a door closing softly along the corridor, coal being moved, water being carried, the far-off stir of servants beginning the invisible machinery of everyone else's comfort. It is enough to remind you that your day has shape whether you are willing or not. Outside the curtains, the light is grey rather than golden, filtered through English weather and a thin film of morning damp. You could stay still and pretend sleep has not quite released you. But the day is already assembling itself, piece by piece, and soon there will be tea, laces, collars, duties, expectations, and an entire choreography of composure waiting to be performed. At last you reach for the bell pull. It hangs near the bed with quiet authority, one small cord connecting your private discomfort to another person's immediate labor. When you tug it, nothing dramatic happens. No cheerful chime, no friendly voice, only a message passed silently into the life of the house. And then, after a pause long enough for you to wonder if anyone heard, the maid appears. She enters with the practiced care of someone who has done this every day, and still hopes not to be blamed for the weather. She opens the curtains and morning arrives all at once, pale and damp, and entirely unimpressed by your reluctance. The fire, if you are fortunate, has been revived. If you are less fortunate, the room still carries the unkind chill of stone walls and dying embers. A tray appears, perhaps with weak tea, perhaps with a small piece of toast, perhaps only with the suggestion that the morning will be easier if everyone avoids speaking too honestly. Beside the washstand waits a jug and basin, water that was once warm and is now merely less cold than the air. You sit up, and the floor beneath your feet offers the kind of cold that climbs quickly through the body and makes you understand, in one instant, why people once designed entire households around fires. Before you have even left the room, you have already made 3 efforts to wake, to warm yourself, and to accept that grace in this century begins with endurance. The morning wash is brief, strategic, and nowhere near as generous as the word bath might suggest. You stand before the basin while the water cools further in the room, and the first ice touch across your face feels less like freshness than a polite shock. There is a cloth, perhaps a sponge, perhaps a towel with the texture of an old opinion. You wash what is necessary and what is considered visible, and what would later allow someone to call you presentable with a straight face. Cleanliness here is an arrangement, not an abundance. The body is not so much immersed as negotiated with. You pat your skin dry, breathe into your hands for warmth, and stare for a moment at the figure in the mirror, still unfinished, still half private, still not yet made social. Outside your door, the house continues in its restrained industry. Somewhere below, breakfast is being laid, somewhere else. Boots are being polished, or stairs brushed, or a parlor fire coaxed into usefulness. The whole day is assembling itself from the efforts of many hands. Yet you will still be expected to wear it as though life has unfolded naturally around you. And because this is only the first quiet skirmish of the morning, you take another sip of tea, gather what warmth you can from the cup, and prepare for the next, more elaborate transformation. Getting dressed is not a simple matter of choosing a frock and stepping into it. It is the construction of a public self, layer by layer, fastened so thoroughly that comfort becomes almost beside the point. You begin in linen, in the last thin garments that still belong more to the body than to society. Then the corset arrives. It waits with the calm certainty of an institution, not cruel exactly, but utterly uninterested in your personal preference. Your maid knows the sequence better than you do. She settles it around you, finds the laces, and begins to pull. Not viciously, not theatrically, simply with purpose. Each adjustment narrows one possibility and creates another. Your waist becomes less your own and more an idea shared by the century. Your spine learns obedience. Your breath becomes shallower, though never quite so shallow as people later like to imagine. The true labor is not dramatic suffocation. It is the steady discipline of moving all day within a shape chosen partly by fashion, partly by class, and partly by the promise that refinement should look almost effortless. Once the stays are set, there are petticoats, and more petticoats, and perhaps flannel if the season insists, and then the dress itself, which may be plain enough for morning, and still contain a small universe of hooks, tapes, seams, cuffs, and buttons. Nothing about this process invites haste. To be dressed is to be prepared, sorted, interpreted, and gently restricted all at once. Then come the details that complete the illusion that this body has simply awakened, beautiful and arranged. Stockings must be smooth, boots must be laced, A fichu or chemisette may soften the neck opening. Cuffs are straightened. A ribbon is tied. Hair, which in modern life can often be gathered and forgotten, becomes in this world its own architectural project. It has to be brushed, parted, coiled, pinned, and persuaded into a shape that says the correct things without saying too much. Too loose, and you look careless. Too severe, and you look harder than the morning requires. The maid's hands move quickly through hairpins, while your own hands remain occupied only with stillness. That too is part of the social education of the day. Someone else labors so that you may appear naturally finished. By the time a bonnet is set nearby for later, and gloves are chosen, and perhaps a trace of scent touches the handkerchief, you are no longer simply awake. You are ready for observation. You have been transformed from a person under blankets into a figure who can be seen at breakfast without apology. And yet inside all those prepared surfaces, you still carry the same private human facts. You are a little cold, a little hungry, and a little tired already. That mismatch between an outer calm and inner effort is one of the quiet themes of the day, and perhaps one reason the whole Victorian world can feel so sleepy in retrospect. So much energy spent creating serenity. Breakfast waits downstairs, with a dignity out of all proportion to its emotional danger. The room is lighter now, though never loud. Curtains admit a careful morning. Silver has been set out. Cups stand ready. A newspaper might already have opened between father and the rest of the family, like a wall built of ink. You take your place at the table with all the invisible calculations that such a simple act requires. Sit too heavily, and you appear careless. Sit too timidly, and you appear nervous. Reach too quickly, and you appear eager in a modern kitchen. Breakfast can be the meal of speed, crumbs, distraction, and indifference. Here it is a small public performance conducted before the day has properly begun. Tea is poured with care. Toast arrives in a rack, meant to keep it dry enough to suggest moral seriousness. There may be porridge, eggs, fish, kidneys, cold meats, or simply whatever the household deems proper for its station and hour. Yet the food itself is only half the occasion. The other half is atmosphere. Everyone present is already placed within a web of expectations. The mother watches manners while pretending not to. The children make war with spoons in silence. Someone mentions the weather because the weather is a topic that feels alive but safe. Someone else refers to a call expected later, or a letter received, or a cousin's engagement, and suddenly the whole room is reminded that reputation has begun work before 9 in the morning. Conversation at breakfast has a particular texture, softer than debate, but sharper than it first appears. It is a place where family affection and family surveillance occupy the same chair. A father lowering his paper to ask whether you slept well may truly care, but he may also be measuring your punctuality, your color, your composure, or your readiness for the social obligations ahead. A mother remarking that the lace at your cuff sits nicely may be offering praise, correction, or both at once. Even the silence has categories. Comfortable silence is one thing. Strained silence is another. The art is to keep everything within the first category, no matter how much the morning might prefer honesty. You butter your toast, you answer gently. You keep elbows in, posture lifted, napkin orderly. Breakfast becomes a lesson in scale. Nothing is a crisis, but everything is noted. This is why the meal can feel strangely tiring, even when it is not long. You are spending attention on a dozen small things at once, and all before the main work of the day has arrived. Still, there is comfort here too. A warm cup in both hands, steam lifting past your face, the familiar scrape of chair legs and porcelain. A slice of ordinary domestic life that is, for one brief portion of the morning, enclosed from the world outside. And when the meal ends with folded napkins and small departures, you feel that curious mixture of nourishment and depletion that so many Victorian routines seem to produce. Once breakfast is cleared, the morning does not dissolve into freedom. It reorganizes itself. A household of any size contains lists that do not look like lists, obligations that do not call themselves obligations, and an entire fabric of expected order held together by memory. The morning room may now receive the family in smaller arrangements. Someone settles with correspondence, someone else with a devotional book. A mother may review the day's visits, lessons, errands, or charitable calls with the air of a person merely mentioning weather, though in truth she is assigning half the emotional weather of the house. Newspapers travel from hand to hand. Servants come and go at the edges carrying notes, trays, coal, or baskets of linen. On the surface, very little is happening. Underneath, the day is being budgeted in units of attention. Who must be seen? Who must be answered? Which room can receive visitors? Whether luncheon will be intimate or formal? Whether a dress must be altered before evening? Whether a cousin's arrival changes everything? These are not the concerns that history books like to dramatize, but they are exactly the ones that shape the feel of a life. The Victorian morning is full of such quiet administration, and it is one reason the era so often feels upholstered with effort. The hours after breakfast do not open into leisure so much as into maintenance. Hair must be brushed again or checked for loose pins. Garments must settle into their proper arrangement. The body, now officially presentable, requires further attention precisely because washing is not constant and bathing is not casual. Hair, in particular, belongs to a slower logic than modern cleanliness. To wash it fully is an event involving cold water, time, heat, privacy, and more effort than daily life is willing to spare. So care becomes a matter of brushing, smoothing, oils, powders, and patience. Long strokes through the hair are thought to preserve its beauty. Distribute whatever the scalp has provided, and maintain the kind of shine that can be mistaken for health. You sit while the brush moves and moves again, and the rhythm itself is almost hypnotic. Outside, wheels pass on the street. Inside, the room holds a quiet domestic smell of linen, wood polish, faint perfume, and cooled ashes. The body is not being remade now. It is being sustained. Many Victorian routines are like that. They exist to preserve an appearance of steadiness under conditions that are, in truth, rather inconvenient. The same is true of skin, of breath, of teeth, of scent. Soap may be harsh, water may be cold, powder may soften what soap cannot, cologne may stand in where certainty fails. A person can look wonderfully composed while still feeling distinctly mortal beneath the lavender. There is something almost touching in the Victorian preference for seeming clean, calm, and orderly, even when daily life makes those states laborious. A ribbon tucked in the right place, a fresh collar, a handkerchief lightly scented, these become not frivolities, but instruments of social peace. They assure everyone, including the person wearing them, that the day remains manageable. And because the outside world places so much emphasis on composure, a great many private inconveniences are handled by denial, delicacy, or strategic silence. If the room is stuffy, one does not announce it with theatrical misery. If the corset pinches, one shifts. If the wash water has turned bitterly cold, one bears it. Endurance is everywhere in this century, but it is often dressed as refinement. This is part of what makes the world of Victorian women so compelling as bedtime history. Behind every neat cuff or smooth braid, there is hidden labor, and hidden labor has a deeply human softness to it. It reminds you that ordinary people in every age are inventing rituals to make life feel more bearable. So as the morning advances and the house grows brighter and more awake, you carry your finished self toward the next domain of effort, which is not the body this time, but society. The first great social machinery of the day may take the form of calling cards. They are small, but they carry surprising weight, thin rectangles of paper that can confirm your civility, your place in a neighborhood, your awareness of recent events, and your willingness to participate in the endless exchange of acknowledgement that holds polite society together. A card left at the proper house within the proper number of days is not a trivial gesture. It is proof that you understand the grammar of belonging. Somewhere in the hall or morning room, there may be a tray of cards received, a tidy little archive of who has visited, who must be answered, who is newly married, newly arrived, newly bereaved, or newly important. To move through this system requires memory and tact. One call demands another. A brief visit must be returned. A condolence must not wait too long. A new neighbor should not be ignored. The very smallness of the card makes its obligations feel strangely large. And because the rules are numerous but rarely announced, the whole business depends on a kind of social instinct that women are expected to possess as though it were part of nature. In reality, it is learned, practiced, and occasionally dreaded. It is administration disguised as gentility. Receiving callers at home requires a different but related skill. One is no longer the guest navigating another woman's sofa and china. One is the still center around which the room must arrange itself. A card tray waits in the hall. The drawing room is either ready or being made ready at a speed that depends on how much notice the caller has given and how forgiving the light may be. Cushions are corrected, a fire may be encouraged, flowers are turned so their best side faces the room. A maid announces a name, and in that brief pause before the guest enters, there is often a whole moral drama compressed into a breath. Are you genuinely pleased to see her? Must you look pleased? Is this visit routine, strategic, affectionate, or tiresome? Then she enters, and all private arithmetic vanishes behind welcome. Tea may be offered, chairs are chosen, conversation begins. The hostess must not appear flustered, though hospitality in this century is rarely effortless. She is expected to create warmth, keep the tempo light, protect the room from awkwardness, and somehow remain a decorative part of the scene rather than its exhausted machinery. It is a demanding magic trick, and Victorian women were required to perform it over and over, until even their fatigue learned to smile. When you go out to make calls, the excursion has the look of light sociability, but beneath that surface lies careful timing. You dress for visiting, which is not quite the same as dressing for shopping or dinner. Gloves matter, the bonnet matters, the carriage, if there is one, matters, even the hour matters, because to call too early or too late is to suggest something unhelpful about your upbringing. Arriving at a house begins another small performance. A servant takes your name or your card. You wait to learn whether the lady is at home, which sometimes means literally present and sometimes means diplomatically unavailable. If she receives you, you are shown into a drawing room designed to flatter conversation by discouraging every truly comfortable posture. You sit, tea may be offered. Weather enters first, as it often does when feelings are unwelcome. Then health, recent movements, mutual acquaintances, charitable events. Perhaps a sister's music, perhaps a cousin's children, perhaps some harmless topic to which everyone can contribute without risking themselves. The call must not last too long. That is one of the most exhausting aspects of Victorian sociability, its precision. A warm friend may be one thing, but an overlong guest becomes a burden. So you learn to speak gracefully, listen alertly, and depart before kindness begins to curdle into relief. By the end of a morning of such calls, you may have said very little of consequence and still feel as if you have been examined from several angles. Then, if fortune is kind, there comes a quieter interval, the carriage ride home, or the walk back, or simply the moment by the window before the next task begins. These are the small returns to safety that make the rest of the day bearable. Perhaps light falls across the rug in a narrow band. Perhaps a fire has gathered enough strength to warm the room at last. Perhaps somewhere in the house, someone is setting out work for the afternoon. And for 1 minute, no one needs you to answer, smile, visit, play, write, or improve yourself. History for sleep lives in such moments, not in the loud occasions people remember, but in these pauses where the body loosens almost without permission. You sit in a chair that fits you a little better than the drawing room furniture of your neighbors. You remove your gloves. You feel the difference between public air and private air. And because the day still has a long middle ahead, you rest inside that difference as long as you can. Needlework often waits there, not merely as pastime, but as proof of character. It fills the hands, tames the hour, and produces objects that can later be shown, gifted, stored, praised, or quietly judged. Embroidery, hemming, mending, marking linen. These tasks occupy an enormous amount of Victorian female time, not because every woman is enchanted by thread, but because idle hands invite questions no one wants asked. A woman's sewing appears industrious, useful, modest, and composed all at once. The work can be beautiful. Of course, silk threads catch the light. White work seems to bloom out of plain cloth. A sampler can carry alphabets, verses, borders, flowers, all stitched with a care that outlives the moment of making. Yet the emotional truth is usually more mixed. Needlework can soothe through repetition, but it can also become the wallpaper of an afternoon, the quiet surface against which family talk, moral instruction, mild criticism, and small private rebellions all play out. You sew because it is expected. You sew because household linen wears out. You sew because a future marriage chest may someday depend on what you finish now. And sometimes perhaps you sew because the regular movement of the hand gives the mind somewhere gentle to go while the rest of life asks too much. A room full of women sewing has its own soft weather. There is thread being drawn through cloth with a faint dry whisper. There is the click of scissors, the rustle of skirts, the occasional comment about a pattern, a cuff, a niece, a sermon, a neighborhood matter. Someone counts stitches, someone reads aloud from a respectable book, someone pretends not to notice that another person has gone unusually silent. In such rooms, competition and tenderness often sit side by side. One woman's neat satin stitch may inspire admiration and irritation in equal measure. Another's eyesight may be failing, but no one says so directly. A young woman may be praised for diligence, when what is really meant is readiness for marriage. An older aunt may correct a hem and call it guidance when what she means is authority. Still, the task itself offers a kind of shelter. Eyes lowered to work cannot easily be accused of boldness. Busy fingers excuse a thoughtful pause. Embroidery becomes a respectable veil, behind which inner life can continue in secret. And because afternoons can be long, especially when weather confines everyone indoors, the steady occupation of cloth and thread helps the day move forward without appearing to hurry. Time in the Victorian home often advances like this, not by dramatic events, but by the gradual completion of tiny things. If you are fortunate or determined, you may steal an hour for reading. Not always openly, not always the book you most want. Reading for a Victorian woman is praised in theory and regulated in practice. Improving texts are safe. Sermons are safe, histories, biographies, travel writing, collections of moral reflections. These can all sit comfortably in plain sight and lend your character a respectable glow. Novels are more complicated. Some are harmless enough. Others are whispered about with a dark excitement later generations reserve for scandalous films or impolite internet searches. Fiction can stir feeling, imagination, dissatisfaction, and self-knowledge, which is precisely why it is cherished and distrusted. So you choose carefully, or appear to. Perhaps a proper volume rests on your lap, while something far more absorbing slips inside it. Perhaps the household knows, and kindly pretends not to know. Perhaps no one is fooled at all, but once the pages begin to work their old magic, the room around you softens. The mind leaves the upholstery, the tea tray, the calendar of calls, and walks elsewhere. There is a special privacy in reading that differs from solitude. Even when you are not alone, a book can build a small room around your thoughts. Inside it, you can travel, compare, question, and feel. You can encounter women bolder than you are allowed to be, or men more attentive than the local reality suggests, or landscapes wilder than your own street and church lane. You can even imagine an existence in which no one is keeping a ledger of calls paid and calls owed. This is perhaps why reading matters so much in the Victorian day. It offers movement within stillness, yet it too must be managed. If you laugh too suddenly, someone may want to know why. If you blush, the wrong aunt may become curious. If the chosen book is known to contain sensation, mystery, or unruly emotion, you may find yourself receiving a lecture disguised as concern. Still, for one hidden hour, a novel can do what no corset, caller, or calling card can manage. It can let you belong entirely to your own attention. And when that hour ends, when the book is closed and tucked away, and the chair returned to decorum, the mind carries a trace of that freedom forward, subtle but real. Soon enough, the household begins to angle toward luncheon, that modest middle meal, which rarely receives the romance of breakfast or dinner, and yet does important emotional work. By luncheon, the day is no longer fresh, but evening is still far away. Appetites are real, patience is thinner, and every person in the house has accumulated some private grievance too small to confess and too large to ignore. The meal itself may be simple by the standards of the grander table. Cold meats, bread, soup, pie, perhaps leftovers translated into respectability by better plating and quieter hopes. But the deeper purpose of luncheon is to steady the rhythm. It interrupts the slide into afternoon dullness. It gives the body something warm or solid. It lets the household gather without the full armor of dinner. For a few minutes, chairs scrape, plates pass, ordinary hunger is admitted, and the conversation, if there is any, can be gentler than at breakfast, because the day has already proven that everyone has survived one another thus far. There is comfort in that. A plain meal in the middle of a long century can feel almost medicinal. The household itself now makes demands. Even in comfortable homes, comfort does not maintain itself. Someone must know what the servants are doing, what has been purchased, what is running low, who is reliable, who is sulking, what rooms need airing, what dinner can be managed, what linens require replacing, and why the coal appears to vanish more quickly whenever the weather worsens. Much of this labor falls to women, especially mistresses of houses, and it is remarkable how often history understates it by describing it as merely domestic. Domestic in this case means logistical, financial, interpersonal, repetitive, and constant. A well-run Victorian home is an organism with many moving parts and very few modern conveniences. Fires must be laid and fed, water must be heated and carried, food must be planned without refrigeration, cleaning is endless. Laundry is formidable, guests complicate everything, and behind the visible order stands a web of hierarchy, delicate enough that a badly timed correction or a neglected grievance can sour the atmosphere for days. To manage such a house well requires memory, tact, stamina, and a face that does not reveal panic. So perhaps you take up the account book, or speak with the housekeeper, or inspect the rooms with that measured calm expected of female authority. One cushion is out of place, a curtain hem has come loose, the silver on a tray gleams less brightly than it should. These are not disasters, but they are opportunities for the Victorian art of the polite complaint. You do not thunder through the corridor issuing orders like an admiral. That would suggest nerves. Instead, you make a remark so gentle, it nearly floats. I wonder whether this might be better here. Perhaps tomorrow, we might try the soup with a little less salt. The phrase is mild. The expectation beneath it is not. There is power in this style, though it is power tied up in indirection. Women are expected to govern without seeming domineering, to correct without displaying irritation, to maintain standards without visible strain. It is an exhausting balance, and perhaps one reason so many private diaries of the period feel sharper than the public voices attached to them. For women with children, younger siblings, or a large family sphere around them, the afternoon may also include supervision of the nursery or schoolroom, a part of life often softened in memory and greatly expanded in practice. Lessons must proceed, copybooks must be checked, a governess may need tactful support or tactful correction. A child with a runny nose, an injured finger, a lost temper, or an impossible opinion about French verbs can alter the whole household weather. Even where servants and teachers exist, responsibility still rises through the female hierarchy like steam through the house. Someone must remember the medicine, the clean pinafore, the changed shoes, the forgotten slate, the visit to grandmother, the thank you note after the birthday parcel. The Victorian ideal liked to picture woman as the moral center of the home, but moral centers are expected to remain available at inconvenient times. That is another hidden labor of the day, the constant readiness to absorb small needs without announcing that they are multiplying. The work of managing appearances, people, rooms, meals, and moods all at once requires more steel than the lace suggests. And somewhere inside all this outward order, a woman is also expected to cultivate beauty without ever seeming consumed by it. A looking glass on a dressing table, a small jar of cold cream, a brush with too many hairs caught in it, a box for ribbons, a sachet tucked among folded collars. These objects form another quiet layer of the day. Grooming is not only cleanliness and not only vanity. It is also reassurance. When the world reads every cuff, collar, hem, and expression as evidence of character, it becomes soothing to straighten a ribbon, repin a strand of hair, smooth the glove fingers, or choose the better brooch for an afternoon call. Such gestures create the illusion that life is still obedient to arrangement. In that sense, the dressing table is almost a private altar to manageability. You sit before it for a minute longer than necessary, not because you are frivolous, but because tiny acts of order can calm a mind that is already being pulled towards society again. Conversation returns as a form of labor too, because the Victorian woman is not simply expected to speak. She is expected to regulate tone, protect reputations, keep company pleasant, avoid vulgarity, redirect danger, and sometimes perform all these tasks while balancing a teacup or guiding a room toward calmer weather. The great talent of this social world is not eloquence in the grand sense. It is finesse, the ability to answer a nosy question without feeding it, the ability to decline an invitation without creating offense, the ability to offer praise that lands warmly and criticism that lands softly. A great many afternoons pass inside this verbal fencing, where everybody smiles and nobody quite says the thing that matters most. The weather remains beloved because it asks so little. Gardens are useful because flowers can carry preference without scandal. Music can be discussed safely, so can sermons, travel, children, and fabrics, politics, money, sex, true disappointment, real anger. These move beneath the conversation like deeper currents under a polite river. You feel them, but you do not point. This skill of saying enough, but not too much, is one of the quiet masterpieces of Victorian life. It takes intelligence and timing and endless rehearsal. A careless joke might be remembered for weeks. A blunt opinion can become a family legend against your interest. Even admiration must be measured. Too much wit, and you seem dangerous. Too much silence, and you seem dull. So the ideal becomes a kind of graceful moderation that is much harder to perform than it sounds. When a relative asks whether your embroidery is nearly done, she may be asking about the embroidery, or she may be asking whether you are industrious, marriageable, idle, distracted, or secretly proud. When someone wonders whether you will be in Bath this season, they may truly mean Bath, or they may mean your health, your finances, your connections, or the state of your prospects. All of this has to be interpreted in real time. No wonder the day can feel mentally tiring without ever appearing dramatic. It is built from constant small readings of other people's meanings. And yet there is a sleepy rhythm to it too, because so much of the language repeats. Polite phrases circle. Safe subjects return. Smiles come and go like lamps in fog. It is social life as slow weather. Later in the day, exercise may be prescribed, though the word itself should not inspire modern images of sweat, speed, or triumphant exhaustion. Victorian exercise for women is expected to improve the complexion and stir the blood without ever threatening delicacy. You may take a turn about the room, which is exactly what it sounds like, moving slowly through a drawing room or gallery, as though the perimeter itself has therapeutic powers. You may walk out if weather allows, and if company is suitable. You may play little croquet, or ride at a controlled pace, or garden lightly enough that no one mistakes you for working. The purpose is not transformation, it is maintenance, freshness, and the impression of health within modest boundaries. Even movement is social. The body must not appear too vigorous, too careless, too independent, too red in the face. So you walk, but beautifully. You breathe, but decorously. You let the day enter your lungs, while pretending not to notice how much nicer it feels outdoors than in a room full of upholstery and obligation. If you go outside, the world offers its own mixture of relief and scrutiny. The air is cooler than the room, and somehow simpler. Streets carry carts, hooves, distant calls, and that forever shifting Victorian mix of mud, commerce, smoke, and horse. In a park, or along a promenade, other women move under hats and parasols, each taking the approved amount of air. You are not alone, because propriety prefers witnesses. Yet being among others outdoors is gentler than receiving them in a drawing room. There is more space for silence. Trees, if present, do some of the conversational work. Gravel underfoot provides a steady, thoughtless rhythm. The body, wrapped all day in etiquette as much as fabric, loosens slightly in motion. This may be the nearest thing to freedom some afternoons allow. And because Victorian life loves balance, the walk also serves as preparation for the next domestic accomplishment. A little fresh color in the cheeks makes the return indoors appear healthy, rather than weary. By the time you come back through the hall, remove your outer things, and settle once more among chairs, tables, and voices, you can almost believe the day has been generous. Almost on certain days the afternoon turns outward again in the name of duty, and duty may wear the gentlest possible clothes. There might be a charitable visit, a committee for parish relief, the preparation of linens for distribution, a stop at the church hall, or a call on someone old, ill, newly widowed, or socially obliged. Victorian womanhood, especially in respectable households, was often framed as moral usefulness, and that usefulness had to be performed in practical ways. Baskets are packed, subscriptions are discussed, a shawl is chosen that says sympathy rather than display. Then one goes out again, not for pleasure this time, but to embody the household's virtue in person. Such calls could be sincerely compassionate, genuinely tedious, quietly meaningful, or all three in the same hour. They also reveal the strange scale of the period. A woman may have little formal power and yet be responsible for a surprising amount of emotional administration beyond her own front door. She carries comfort, advice, moral tone, and family reputation together, all in a gloved hand. Music practice frequently claims the later afternoon, and it is hard to overstate how much of middle-class respectability can fit inside one piano stool. The instrument stands in the room not merely as furniture, but as evidence. A proper home has culture, proper daughters play, proper evenings may be ornamented with song. And so you sit at the pianoforte with your back arranged as carefully as your hair was that morning, and you begin. Scales first perhaps, or pieces assigned by a teacher who believes repetition builds character, which is fortunate because repetition is what the instrument demands most reliably. The keys are cool under the fingers. The room receives each note, forgiving some, exposing others. If the house is large, music drifts into corridors and stairwells, announcing industry. If the house is smaller, everyone hears everything, which is its own form of discipline. The point is not always beauty. Often it is effort visible through sound. A young woman who practices is doing what she ought. A young woman who plays well is admired. A young woman who plays too brilliantly may inspire a tiny flicker of unease, because excellence always risks becoming a kind of self-assertion. Still, there are moments when the music ceases to belong entirely to duty. A melody repeats until it softens. The fingers learn where to go without panic. Even a simple waltz can begin to carry the room somewhere gentler. For a few minutes, the afternoon is no longer stitched, counted, visited, or accounted for. It is measured only in bars and phrases. Perhaps someone in the next room turns a page more slowly to listen. Perhaps a child, not yet old enough to guard expression, leans into the doorway with unhidden interest. Perhaps you yourself feel that quiet inward drop that happens when a task shifts from obligation into absorption. The Victorians valued music for its social uses, but its deeper gift may have been this one. It let feeling move safely through the house without anyone having to confess it in words. A hymn can express submission. A sentimental ballad can express longing. A lively piece can lift the mood of a room that has grown too careful. No wonder households clung to such rituals. They allowed emotion to be performed at a respectable angle. Sometimes the music hour expands into its own social trial when practice becomes performance. A family guest asks for a piece. An aunt insists on hearing the song you used to play so sweetly last winter. The music stool suddenly feels less like a perch and more like a witness stand. Sheet music is shuffled. Pages are turned with fingers that are only mostly steady. Everyone in the room arranges their faces into the kind expression that is somehow more unnerving than obvious criticism. Then you begin. The first notes feel fragile, but after a few bars, the old pattern returns. Even so, it is not merely sound being judged. It is poise, modesty, grace under notice. If you play too timidly, you seem underprepared. Too boldly, and some hidden line of feminine propriety may have been crossed. The Victorian daughter is forever being asked to accomplish the difficult middle. Enough talent to adorn the room, not so much force that she takes possession of it. When the piece ends, the applause is warm, and the relief is warmer. Then there are letters, and letters can fill an astonishing amount of life. In the modern mind, they sound charming, but in practice, they are work. You choose paper, pen, and ink. You consider whom you owe an answer, whom you must congratulate, whom you must console, whom you have neglected just long enough to become faintly anxious. The first lines are a genre of their own, full of health, hope, weather, gratitude, and every other acceptable preface to the actual purpose of writing. But the real body of the letter must do more than convey information. It must manage relationship. Too brief and you seem cold. Too direct and you seem unpolished. Too lively, and you may say more than prudence allows. So you compose with care. You describe visitors, illnesses, plans, small local dramas, changes in servants, improvements in gardens, charitable events, dresses nearly finished, books recently enjoyed, all with just enough personality to seem alive and just enough restraint to remain fit for being shown to another person, which letters often were. Privacy exists, but it is not dependable. The hand grows tired long before the social field is fully covered. Ink catches unexpectedly. A word looks wrong. A sentence must be rephrased so that it reveals less while sounding warm. Yet there is intimacy in this labor too, the curve of familiar handwriting, the little private rhythms between cousins, sisters, friends. A page can hold affection that speech, in its public setting, cannot safely manage. Letters become a second social world, running parallel to visits and tea tables. They carry news, apologies, observations, half-veiled opinions, invitations, regrets, and those mild domestic details which, when repeated often enough, become the true texture of a life. When the letter is finally folded, sealed, addressed, and sent away, it carries a part of the day with it. And immediately, of course, the task renews itself, because correspondence breeds more correspondence. The Victorian woman is never entirely finished communicating. She is only between letters. Beyond letters lies another quieter territory of upkeep. Clothes that must be stored, brushed, altered, revived, and interpreted anew with every season or invitation. Wardrobes in the 19th century are less about casual choice than about a continuous relationship with fabric. Dresses are expensive, remade, handed down, trimmed differently, adjusted after mourning, refreshed for a new year, or dismantled so that one garment can live a second life inside another. Afternoon light often falls across exactly this kind of work. A skirt spread over a chair, a box of buttons opened like a small treasury, patterns folded, a seam examined. Perhaps a maid helps, perhaps a mother advises, perhaps you sort gloves that can still be rescued from respectability, and those that have crossed some invisible threshold into garden use. There is intimacy in such tasks because clothes know the body's recent history. They remember dinners, damp walks, dances, pregnancies, illnesses, seasons, griefs. To tend them is also, quietly, to tend the passage of one's own life. Shopping, when it occurs, is not the casual browsing of a bored afternoon. It is another form of interpreted behavior. The milliner, the draper, the glovemaker, the stationer. Each shop contains not only goods, but choices that can alter how you will be read. Fabrics, ribbons, trims, and hats all speak a language of means, modesty, fashion, season, and taste. To choose well requires knowledge. To choose too boldly requires confidence. To choose too plainly may suggest economy, mourning, or indifference. And because the act of buying is observed by clerks, companions, and sometimes acquaintances encountered by chance, it becomes one more public moment nested inside the day. You examine gloves, you compare shades, you ask the price without appearing worried by it. You hope the mirror is honest. Even pleasure can feel supervised in such a setting. Yet there is also delight in texture, in color, in the simple fact that objects can still surprise the eye. A ribbon, the exact blue of a winter dusk. A silk that changes slightly as it moves. A fan painted with a scene so tiny it seems made for secrets. The century can be exhausting, yes, but it is not poor in detail. By the time afternoon tea arrives, the day has gathered enough small fatigues that the tray itself can look like salvation. Yet tea is rarely just tea. It is a ritual of pause wrapped around another ritual of observation. Cups appear, a kettle breathes, sandwiches, cakes, biscuits, bread and butter, preserves, all wait under the soft, bright tyranny of hospitality. Family members or guests gather again, now a little looser than at breakfast, but no less capable of interpretation. This is often the hour when relatives feel licensed to become curious. Marriage prospects may be hinted at, new dresses considered, household economies discussed without admitting they are being discussed. Children hover at the edge of pastries like weather around a coastline. Someone cuts the cake, someone watches how generously it is cut. There is almost comic tenderness in the seriousness with which the whole thing proceeds. Tea is comfort, but comfort in Victorian life nearly always arrives with form. From tea, the day often moves into that especially delicate period, when the house may receive a final run of visitors. Family members settle into preferred corners, and the drawing room becomes a stage for small hierarchies. Seating is political in gentle disguise. One chair is best for warmth, another for the light. A sofa near the center of the room invites inclusion and risk in equal measure. Elderly relatives claim habit as a right. Younger women float where they are placed, unless they have already learned the rarer art of choosing without seeming to choose. Even silence arranges itself by furniture. Someone near the fire tells a story that has been told before. Someone near the piano pretends they are not hoping to be asked to play. Someone by the window watches dust collect in the glass and briefly forgets to answer. These are the hours when a house reveals its private map of temperaments. The sociable, the dreamy, the managerial, the easily wounded, the determinedly cheerful, all appear in softened evening form, and the woman moving among them must understand more than she says. And yet, if you look at it gently, tea also reveals something kind about the age. However burdened the day may be, people repeatedly stop to create little islands of warmth. A teapot, a better chair, a plate passed by hand, the sound of porcelain, the brief permission to sit together and not call it idleness, because the table has justified the pause. So you take your cup, you feel heat at the fingers, you let sweetness or tannin do what they can for a spirit worn thin by social arithmetic. Perhaps this is why tea remains one of the easiest paths back into safety when thinking about Victorian life. It is one of the few rituals whose comfort we still understand immediately. You do not need a lecture on class or etiquette to know what it means to sit down, breathe steam, and hope no one asks anything difficult for a few minutes. Evening gathers slowly, lamps are lit, curtains are drawn against the dark. The house contracts inward. Dinner dresses may be a little finer now, jewelry a little brighter. The arrangement of the hair refreshed if guests are expected. At table, the formality increases again. Courses come in sequence. Servants move quietly. Silver catches light. Conversation must thread its way between appetite and decorum. A woman is not supposed to appear greedy, dull, argumentative, or absent. She should contribute enough to keep the meal from sinking into deadness, but not so much that she overwhelms it. The whole occasion can feel like walking on polished boards in narrow shoes. You sit straight, manage utensils, remember names, respond to questions, and do not let fatigue show too honestly. Dinner is one of the places where class performance becomes most visible, because food, service, and manner all appear together. Yet under the starched ease lies the same human fact that has followed you since morning. You are simply a person crossing hours, hoping not to falter in public. Before dinner, there's often the second toilette of the day, and it deserves its own quiet place in the story, because it reveals how Victorian time was divided not only by meals and visits, but by presentations of the self. Morning dress said readiness. Afternoon dress said usefulness. Evening dress says display moderated by propriety. Hair is checked again, perhaps loosened and repinned with a softer arrangement for candlelight. Jewelry appears from its case, selected not only for beauty, but for occasion, relation, and mood. Silk whispers differently at night than cotton does by day. Oh, a better pair of gloves may wait. Slippers replace boots. There is anticipation in this dressing, but also weariness. The body that was bound and guided and watched all day must once more become decorative without complaint. Even so, twilight helps, lamps flatter, shadows are merciful. The person in the mirror looks less like a worker in the machinery of domestic life and more like one of the finished images the age admired. That too is part of the seduction of evening. It allows labor to glow. After dinner comes the drawing room, and with it, that particularly Victorian conviction that the day should not merely end. It should be improved before it is allowed to close. So there may be music again, or charades, or recitation, or card games, or some family amusement whose chief purpose is to demonstrate cheerfulness. Everyone is expected to participate in the correct spirit, which is to say with enough enthusiasm to seem sociable and enough restraint to remain respectable. Some evenings are genuinely pleasant. A story lands well. A cousin sings sweetly. A child says something accidentally wise. But many evenings carry a gentler kind of fatigue. The fatigue of being required to perform leisure as carefully as one has performed duty. You laugh where laughter belongs, you clap. You take your turn, you admire. You do not reveal that the best entertainment available would be 10 unsupervised minutes and a chair near the fire. There is, however, a soft beauty to these interiors at night. Candlelight, forgiving the room, polished wood, darkening into amber, music lingering in corners where daylight would have made everything too plain. A poem half heard can become dreamlike when the body is tired enough. Even the nonsense of parlor games can feel unreal in a pleasant way, as though the household has drifted into a small floating theater where no one is allowed to confess boredom outright. Perhaps that is why evenings matter so much in this sort of story. They reveal the emotional cost of the day, and also its odd tenderness. People who live under many rules do not always become colder. Sometimes they become more ritualistic about comfort. A candle passed closer, a shawl arranged, a sofa made available, a favorite song repeated because everyone knows it settles the room. Long before sleep, the house begins preparing for release. When at last you are permitted a little privacy again, it feels larger than its actual size. A journal may come out, or a scrap of paper, or simply the inward voice that becomes possible only when no one is asking, observing, or needing. The Victorian day is so full of managed expression that private writing can feel almost revolutionary, even when it contains nothing more dangerous than honest annoyance. Here at last you may admit what would sound improper over tea, that the corset was unforgiving, that Aunt so-and-so was impossible, that the soup was overpraised, that the call to a neighbor felt endless, that you read a chapter you were not supposed to enjoy so much, that a passing thought about travel or solitude or authorship visited you and would not quite leave. Diaries of the period are often moving for this reason. They preserve the human weather behind the arrangement. Not every woman wrote dramatically. Many wrote plainly, even dutifully. But plainness itself can glow when it records a real interior life. In those private lines, ambition sometimes peeks through. So does frustration, so does humor. After writing, many women return to one final structure of thought before bed. Prayer, reflection, or some devotional habit meant to settle the conscience as much as the nerves. The 19th century was full of routines for examining the day, not only in terms of what had been done, but in terms of whether it had been done in the proper spirit. Was one patient enough, charitable enough, modest enough, grateful enough? It could be a tender practice or a burdensome one depending on the hour and the household. Yet, in the quiet bedroom, with the candle lower and the corridor still, it often became something softer than doctrine. A chance to name the day and release it, a way of gathering scattered impressions into a single inward movement before sleep. Even those who felt religion less as comfort than duty might find peace in the repetition of familiar words. Repetition itself is calming. It gives the mind rails to rest on when it is too tired to think clearly and too wakeful to stop thinking altogether. The social self, so carefully maintained all day, loosens at the edges. Perhaps you imagine another life, not necessarily a grand one, but a wider one. More rooms of your own mind, fewer calls owed, more time with books, a train ticket, a published page, or perhaps your desires are smaller and therefore sadder. A morning left unstructured, a meal eaten without scrutiny, a walk taken alone, a dress chosen for comfort rather than meaning. Such wishes do not need to become political manifestos to be poignant. They are enough to remind us that beneath every age's manners, there are always private negotiations between duty and self. And because bedtime history works best when it returns gently to that human scale, this is where the story softens further. Not in spectacle, but in confession quiet enough that only the candle hears it. The final ritual of the body begins. Hairpins are removed one by one, their hold on the day slowly giving way. The hair falls differently when it is no longer arranged for company. The face is washed again, this time not for presentation but for release. Powder comes away, dust comes away. The room is cooler now, and the water is unlikely to be any kinder than it was at dawn, but the meaning has changed. Morning washing prepared you to be seen. Evening washing helps you disappear from view. Boots are set aside, bodice loosened, laces undone, layers lifted away in reverse order, as though the whole day is being unwound from the body thread by thread. There is immense relief in becoming less interpreted. Night clothes do not ask you to represent the household. They merely let you exist inside it. Perhaps a prayer is said, perhaps scripture is read, perhaps the house, finally quieting, provides its own sort of liturgy in floorboard sighs and dying coals. The bedroom receives you differently at night than it did in the morning. Then it was cold resistance, now it is retreat, but night in a Victorian house is never wholly abstract or dreamy. It remains physical in ways the modern bedroom often forgets. Windows may rattle faintly, a draught may find the gap no curtain quite defeats. Somewhere nearby stands the plain, practical presence of the chamber pot, the object nobody wants in a romantic painting, and everybody needs in an unheated house. The hot water bottle, if provided, becomes a small blessing. Bedding has weight, not the cloud-like weight of modern duvets, but the serious layered weight of a house trying to keep bodies warm by textiles alone. Even the sounds are thicker, timber settling, distant steps, a late door latch, wind grazing the outside wall. The old house never becomes perfectly silent. Instead, it offers a kind of inhabited hush, a silence threaded with proof that many lives are sleeping near one another. For some minds that would be unsettling, for others it is deeply comforting. You are not alone in the dark, the whole house is holding its breath with you. The same curtains, bed, blankets and basin have become gentler because the day has spent you. A maid may turn down the bed, a warming pan may have done its work, a candle leaves one moving oval of light against the wall. The air still carries traces of the house below, smoke, polish, starch, supper. But they are fading now beneath linen and darkness. You sit on the bed's edge and feel for a moment the extraordinary fact that nothing more can reasonably be demanded tonight. No callers, no corrections, no scales, no letters, no parlor duties. Only sleep, if the mind will allow it. This is the point in the Victorian day where modern comforts begin to glow by contrast. Central heat, soft towels, quick showers, dentistry without dread, stretch fabric, electric lamps, solitude not won through layers of etiquette. History can make gratitude out of the plainest things, and yet it is worth lingering a little longer with the woman in this room, because she is not merely a symbol of inconvenience. She is also a person who has moved skillfully through a world built of tiny demands and somehow kept herself intact inside them. She has risen in the cold, dressed into shape, eaten under observation, visited, sewn, read, managed, walked, played, written, smiled, and withdrawn again, and all of it has formed the unremarked labor of one ordinary day. That is the true reveal beneath the lace and ritual. Victorian womanhood, at least in its respectable domestic form, was not made only of ornamental idleness. It was made of continuous adjustment to rooms, to fabrics, to people, to time, to expectations, to one's own body. The work was not always named as work. That does not make it less real. In fact, it may be one reason the whole subject settles so strangely well into a sleep story. It is full of repetition, texture, hidden effort, and soft endurance, the same materials from which long human days are made in every century. So perhaps now the room can loosen all the way. Imagine the last candle being lowered. Imagine the hallway beyond the door falling quiet. Imagine the house itself giving in, each floor and beam releasing the faint sounds stored up during daylight. The woman in the bed closes her eyes. Outside, a carriage passes somewhere far off, then nothing. Inside, blankets gather their weight. A cooled fireplace holds the memory of heat. Tomorrow will bring the same sequence in altered detail. Another breakfast, another letter, another conversation about harmless things that are never only harmless. But that belongs to another waking. For now, the labor of being visible is over. The body no longer needs to hold itself in readiness. The mind may wander without being corrected. The dark asks nothing except surrender. And if you listen closely from your own century, from your own bed, from your own kinder conveniences, you may notice that the old world has left you a small gift. Not a corset, not the calling card, not the inspection of cuffs and cake portions. The gift is contrast, the reminder that comfort is often most visible when history removes it. Your room is warmer, your body is freer, your towel is softer. Your evening can belong more fully to you. The ordinary modern life that so often feels rushed and unfinished may, in this light, begin to look almost luxurious. A switch, a shower, a mattress, a closed door, water that arrives warm, air that does not need to be negotiated with a coal scuttle. These are quiet miracles, and quiet miracles are excellent company for sleep. So let the house recede now. Let the buttons, gloves, trays, ribbons, staircases, bonnets, account books, calling cards, and candlelit parlors drift into the distance where old days go when they are no longer being remembered on purpose. Keep only the softest parts, the steam from the tea, the brush through the hair, the rustle of curtains, the hush after footsteps leave the room. The strange peace of knowing that even in a demanding century, night still came, blankets still settled, and tired women still laid down their roles for a few unguarded hours. You do not need to follow the story any farther. You've already crossed the day. You have reached the cool, dark edge of rest, and from here, with the old house quiet and your own room safe, you can simply let go.